All right, folks. Thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to be here. I'm a little nervous talking to such a kind of awesome crowd of people. I will say that I'm used to giving talks to people who might start at a slightly lower level than the current crowd. I'm a little concerned about that, but I'm going to go as quick as I can through the kind of foundational stuff that I think I need to get through. Um, so this is me. I work at a company called TLC Labs. I shouldn't hit that button. Um, work at TLC Labs and a company called TLC. We make library software. That's my blog. Um, you guys can tweet at me if you want to tweet at me. Use the Reactor tag. I like to point out my job description to people because it's subtly different than most CTOs. Um, Most CTOs kind of do the first thing, envision the types of technology that may reasonably be expected to be produced in the next 5 to 10 years. But I think the thing that I do differently than a lot of other CTO type people is I'm mostly concerned about making the teams capable of doing that and capable of producing the vision and outcomes themselves. So a lot of my focus has been around developing a system that's capable of producing outcomes itself, which has been interesting. So this talk, I'm trying to, in this talk, do more about creating space than black and whites. I'm going to say some stuff that not everybody's going to like. And I think that's okay, but I'm not trying to create a black, I'm trying to create a space so that we can talk in between those spaces as opposed to saying, this is the right way to do it. And I'm doing that primarily from the viewpoint of I would like to have the talk to be taken as an inspirational place as opposed to an instructional place. I'm not here to teach you guys things. I'm here to try to talk to you about things that I've done and the ways that we've thought about these problems at TLC. Basic structure of the talk, I'm going to do some definitions because I like to have basic pieces in because I did philosophy for a long time. Then I'm going to do formulating the mess. So anybody who's read Akoff's Idealized Design, one of the things that Akoff does is instead of identifying an endpoint that you'd like to reach, he says you should formulate the problem space and say that's not where we want to go. It gives us a lot more options. And so I wanted to use this technique for this talk because of the nature of what we're trying to do here. I didn't want to try to define an end state that the LSS should try to get to. I wanted to really try to create at least a list of problems that we might want to address and solve. From there, I'm going to move on to some potential principles that we use at TLC for designing human systems. And then I'm going to talk about 2 experiments that we did that came out of those principles. And then finally, I have some ideas about how we might move towards better systems in the future. Let me go really quickly through the definitions. So, systems. Akoff defines systems in 3 different levels, or 4 different levels, but I'll do these 3 first. Deterministic, animate, and social. So, deterministic is the classic mechanical machine concepts. The main concept with deterministic is that there is no mind involved in the system. There's an external intention applied to the system. It's also almost always a designed system. Most deterministic systems have been designed by something. On top of that, we have animate. And animate adds in a concept of purpose and intention. So an animal has deterministic parts, so like your organs and things like that, but it has intent or purpose. It's trying to achieve something. On top of that, we have social, which is that the social system itself has purpose or intent, and the pieces inside of the system also have intent. So you have multiple levels of intent at that point. So Akoff continues to say that the real important part about systems is their interactions, right? It's not the individual pieces that matter, it is the interactions. And he has a famous story that he gives about cars. He basically says you take all the cars, best cars in the world, take them apart, have all the best engineers come in and pick the best parts of every car, try to put them back together, you don't get a car, right? It's the interactions of the pieces that define things. I like to modify that one. I think that in a lot of social systems, they're more like dogs, right? So We can't analyze a dog by taking it apart, looking at all the pieces, and then putting it back together when we're done. Doesn't work that way, right? I think systems are pretty frequently like that. Social systems can't be taken apart and expected to go back together again. They have to be examined at the holistic level. So the other kind of concept of systems and social systems and complexity of systems is ants and murmurations, right? And I point this out because to give some differentiation for later. Ants and birds are classically used as an example of emergent behavior, right? So as stuff that happens without leadership. So murmurations are beautiful to watch, and the birds aren't really following anyone. They're reacting to the environment. It's quite interesting. Ants, again, there is a queen ant, but the queen ant actually has nothing to do with controlling the hive at all. The behavior is emergent from individual pieces. One of the interesting things about ants and murmurations, of course, is that there's actually very little purpose or intention in an ant, right? It doesn't make a lot of decisions. It's actually primarily driven by instinct, if you would like. The other type of interaction that we have that we can see, which leads us to Ackoff's fourth concept of systems, is adaptation. And we see adaptation as an interaction between a system and its environment. And one of the things that we have in ideal systems, or systems that are highly performing, is that they interact with their environment and they don't fight back against the environment, right? So they adapt to it. And this concept of a system, Ackoff says, has two different things in it. It has both mechanistic or even inanimate objects, non-systems, in it, and other animate or social systems as well. So the environmental systems support and surround the systems, the social systems that we're working with, but they're kind of the medium that things live in. And so I like to call this concept organic systems, right? So you can see the sand in here is a type of system. No intention in any of the objects, but it's purely responding to the environment that it's in. So this is kind of like an ideal organic system. So when we think about social systems and we think about the environment they're in, how much do we want the social system to react or interact with the environment that we're in? Finally, Ackoff goes forward and says that there's two types of systems that we can design, right? So one is variety increasing systems, and one is variety decreasing systems. I think most of the systems that humans design tend to be the latter, right? And it might be interesting to talk about or think about the first one. So, moving on to the next piece, humanistic. So, if we're going to design humanistic systems, we probably should know what humanistic means. And in general, this is the way that I think of human systems. Come on, you're giving the joke away. Okay, so I think this is the way that we normally think of work and how to improve work in a cycle, right? We have work, which is what the outcome is, the pin, the artifact, the code that we're going to develop. And we have working, which is hammering and carrying things and creating things and tinkering with things. And basically we say that the way that we improve is we produce one of the work items, and then we inspect it, and then we adapt the work system to fit what our outcomes want to be, right? So we have an inspect and adapt loop. And I think the problem with this model and the way that thinking about this for human systems is that it has a very key assumption, and that key assumption is that humans are rational, and that they can actually observe the parts of the system that the decisions that they made, the way that they made the decisions, in order to understand how the outcome came to be. And I think the problem with this is, as Russell says, is that humans are really pretty irrational. And when we actually look at things, humans are very bad at being rational. They're very bad at paying attention to things. And so this is actually what I think we need to think about work and work systems for humans, which is that there's work, there's working, and then there's a worker, and that humans are innately bound. They are not infinite. So this is kind of if anybody's heard of economic man or the rational decision-making man model from economics, this is a more accurate version of it, right? Like we have bounded perception, we can't see everything, I can't see behind my head. We have bounded understanding, we don't all understand the same thing in the same way. We have bounded rationality, we don't make rational decisions pretty frequently. And finally, humans are almost defined by their fallibility. It's almost what it means to be human. So the other thing about when we think about human systems that I think is important to notice, we don't put more humans together because we want bigger piles of humans, right? It's not the outcome that we're looking for. We're not using them for leveraging on rocks or something like that. We're trying to actually create emergent value from the individuals, right? So what we want to be managing or examining or thinking about is those emergent powers, not the individual powers of individual people. Alicia Juro says that this is probably one of the key factors that we get out of emergent systems for humans, which is that when we put a bunch of humans together, it gives the individuals in that system more options, right? And actually, that's what we want. So as an individual, I couldn't have come here, but I'm part of an organization that helped me get here, right? So that's the type of thing that we want to think about as well. Finally, or continuing on, people are quirky, right? So they're not only irrational, but they're all pretty radically different, and they're not computers, right? So we're not looking for aggregate. This is not a wet computer where we're looking for multiprocessing powers, right? In fact, computers are really good at processing data, and humans are pretty bad at it. So that's not the emergent system that we're looking for. We're not just trying to aggregate more thinking power together. So Akoff also points out that one of the things that we need to understand about humans is that they're all different, and that managers need to understand this in order to maximize the outcomes. So moving on. So the next thing, which is knowledge. So if we're going to build a human system for knowledge work, we need to understand how knowledge is in human systems. And the first and most obvious one is the difference between tangible and intangible. A lot of the work systems that we've built up until now that were to produce mechanized outcomes, to produce mechanized systems, had a nice effect to them, which was you were producing something that was in front of you. Everybody could point at it and talk to it. You could inspect each step and know whether or not it was going in the right direction. So we had very tangible outcomes. We could observe those tangible outcomes as we went through the process. The problem is that now we're getting more and more into intangible work. So management may be the most intangible thing that I can think of doing. There's almost no physical outcome that you can produce. But the work that we're doing is also highly intangible. And one of the problems with it being intangible is that you can't ask people to output the intermediaries, right? So you can't say, show me what you're thinking. You can, but it will actually affect the results. So observing that forces people to slow down, slow cycle times down, all that type of stuff. So the intangibility of it means that we have, as managers, an inability to observe the state of the system at all times, which is problematic. The other thing is that knowledge in human systems is often tacit and not explicit, or there's at least a significant balance between the two. I think that most human systems have a far greater amount of tacit knowledge, which can be described also as embodied knowledge or contextual knowledge, and that actually most people in human systems don't know everything they need. They don't know what they know, right? David Snowden goes deeper than that, and I think this is one of the critical things to understand. So I call these his constraints on knowledge. And I think they're important to think about. Knowledge can only be volunteered, it can't be conscripted. You can't force people to tell you something they don't want to tell you. We only know what we need to know when we need to know it. This is frequently the problem of If I actually put you in a problem space, you'll know the answer. If I ask you the answer without showing you the problem space, you're kind of like, I don't know, right? So humans are actually pretty good at solving problems if they're in the problem, in the context. They're very bad at abstracting problems and solving them outside of context. Everything is fragmented. So a lot of the way that we're learning to transmit information, Twitter, things like this, we're creating smaller and smaller snippets of information to make it more consumable, right? We've been talking a lot about this concept here of simplifying messages. Well, simplified messages have a really nice effect in that they are very viral and they move through human networks very quickly. But the problem with them is that as we simplify them, we intentionally remove contextual reference from them to make them smaller. And it fragments them and it makes them more brittle. So as we simplify messages, we also have to pay for that by removing the contextual references from them. The way we know things is not the way we report we know things. Often we say that we think we made decisions in certain ways, and that's not actually how we made the decision at all. And we always know more than we can say, and we always say more than we can write down. So this is a concept that as we move forward in kind of the concreteness of our expression, so writing might be one of the more concrete expressions of verbal information, the less information actually comes out of our heads, right? So the problem of this, I think, for human systems ends up being it becomes very difficult to get the information to move from one human mind to another human mind in any sort of efficient or effective way. I don't mean it as in doomsaying, but just as a warning. So this is how I like to think about knowledge in human networks. Information, skill, and knowledge are embedded in networks and relationships. Individuals, instead of owning information, which is a classic concept, right? They own the information, attract, translate, and know how to and where to access the information that emerges in networks around them, right? So if you take a lawyer, this is a classic study, take a lawyer out of a law firm, put him in another law firm, he was high performing over here, he's mediocre over here. And the reason is because he knew where to get the information in this network. He could find it. He had the right connections and the right way of thinking. And the knowledge wasn't his. It was embodied or distributed in the network that he is part of. So, flow. So this is a lean conference, so I shouldn't have to go into this too much. But I'd like to point out a couple things. I like to first think of flow, the opposite, which is stagnation. So, what is stagnation? What causes stagnation in human systems? And the first is simply inaction. So, a lot of stagnation, a lot of cycle time in a lot of our businesses is simply people can't decide to take action. They don't have the decision structures that they need in order to say, I'm going to do this, right? So it stagnates, it doesn't move forward, and we have problems with it. And then the second one is just inattentiveness. A lot of stagnation in organizations is that people don't even know that there's a thing sitting over there that needs to get done. It's in between silos, it's in between two different managers, all sorts of things. It hides from us. So I like to think of flow in two specific different ways in the kind of positive way. The first one is I really like it when this clicker works. Is Hawkins' concept here. He calls it flow efficiency versus resource efficiency. So flow in this model is the idea of focusing on removing the waste caused by an overfocus of resource efficiency. And that's largely about removing wait time and using limited WIP and things like that to focus on making sure that systems produce outcomes on a regular, even cycle time that can be reduced and concentrated on, right? So that's the first form of flow. But the second form of flow in human systems that I like to talk about is just this model of flow, right? And I think that, again, when we get back to that idea of decision making and how to make decisions and the fact that a lot of information and a lot of knowledge is embedded in people in a way that we can't get it out of people, we need to focus on this concept of flow that says that people like to be challenged, they like to be challenged within the appropriate boundary, and that what we want to do at the organizational level is create organizational levels of flow, which puts us just on the boundary of what we're capable of doing and what would challenge us, and has us as an organization have that experience of fluidity. So that requires, I think, mindful decisions to act, right? So this is the thing that we've been concentrating, I think, most on at TLC, which is we've been focusing less on outcomes and more on decisions. If that makes sense, right? So, and noticing when we're making decisions and noticing when we're defaulting. So when we're not making decisions, but we're just going with it, right? And so we're going to talk about that some more. And then the next question becomes whose decisions are valuable? And so we'll get into that. So here's the mess. I've kind of described some of the problems, but here's some more kind of details. I think the first mess is that lots of systems are designed with the assumption that there is a problem that can be defined. And in fact, most systems have multiple interacting problems, and attempting to isolate and define one problem, that is a problem, right? We need to, when we think about designing systems and how we design systems and how we teach people to design systems, to avoid this idea that, that the problem is simple. In fact, the problems are often highly complex and highly interrelated. The second one is mechanistic atomism. And I use these two words together because I think that they reinforce each other. So mechanistic thought is this idea that humans can be treated like machines. And not only that, but that they can be atomized, so that individual parts matter, or that humans are capable of acting as sole or separate from each other. So social atomism, an early philosophy saying that people can operate by themselves. And I think that that's problematic. It causes the classic concept of the separation of head and hands, so that we have an idea that some people should be doing the work and some people should be doing the thinking. Again, a typewriter does not have a mind. You need to apply a mind to it. If we treat humans like that, we get the same result, which is I'll do the thinking, you do the working. Highly problematic. And I think that this causes some interesting results that you can see pretty directly. The first one is what I like to call the reverse Turing test. Everybody know what the Turing test is. It's an attempt to determine whether or not the computer at the other end is a computer or a human. I think that pretty frequently what we actually do is we sit humans down at the beginning of a year and we give them a set of instructions, how they're going to be measured at the end of the year. And then we determine whether they were computer-like. Did they fulfill the specifications that we gave? And we actually reward people for being more computer-like. And I think that's problematic. And part of it is, again, because of the way that we think about, the way humans are, so this idea that we are good at solving problems contextually, you sit a human down, abstracted from his work, and you ask him, what are the things that you need to be good at? And then he kind of goes, I don't know. You put him in the problem space and you ask him what he wants to be good at. He's like, those three things right now is what I need to be able to do, right? So this kind of abstraction and this asking for people to define their skills in a vacuum is problematic. I think that we confuse quite frequently the concept of durability versus sustainability. So sustainability is a key concept inside of Agile, and it's used pretty frequently, but I think that people are probably really meaning durable. And so durable is this: how many times can I drop this thing on the floor before it breaks, which equates to how many hours can a software engineer work until he falls over? Okay, so I should maximize that, right? That's not sustainable, right? That's a different concept, and it's not the one that we're really trying to achieve. Sustainable, at least in the environmental realm, means something very specific, and it means that it's a system that can support a large amount of diversity inside of an environment. That's what it means. right? And that's what we mean by sustainable, I think. And that's the sustainable that we'd like to see in our systems. Ones that allow a large amount of diversity, allow a large amount of diversity of options, a large amount of diversity of goals. So I have different goals than everybody else in the room. I think a system that supports that is a sustainable system. The other one that we have with durability is this context-free durability. So context-free durability, what I mean by this is that we pretty frequently design systems with a default assumption that we should design them to live forever. It's a problem, right? And so a lot of people that I talk to say, I have long-standing teams. They went through storming, norming, forming. I paid the price for it. I'm not letting them separate, right? This is a key part of a lot of kind of agile implementations is long-standing team. Well, I think that becomes problematic because if we are bringing work to long-standing teams instead of finding problems and assembling teams around the problems, we're asking people to do the thing that's hard for humans to do, which is to move knowledge from human to human. So that's problematic, and I think that we need to be pay more attention to the concept of durability and how much durability we really need in our systems. The other thing I think about human systems that's problematic is that a lot of, this is kind of a rephrasing of the classic theory X, but I like Russell's version better. We make moral judgments about people's inability to not be machines. You failed. Yes, I'm human, right? So this is a classic concept is we make moral judgments against humans that we would never make against machines, and I think it's an interesting problem. Who's in control around here anyway? So this is the biggest problem I think I have with a lot of systems, and it has to do with sustainability. So one of the things we're trying to do with systems, we're trying to create these emergent powers, right? We're trying to create these emergent things, that the ability to do certain things. I think that in a lot of systems that we look at, if we look around the world right now, one of the problems we have is that the systems have far more agency than any of the humans involved, right? So the systems have gone largely out of control. Nobody can change them in effective ways, and this is problematic. A story that comes to mind is a friend who worked at a train company, and they knew the software architecture had to be replaced in 5 years, but the system had so much more agency than they did that they just keep on rewriting it over and over and over again, right? Because nobody could actually change it, because every time they did, the system would revert back. And this is largely about that concept of emergent powers. So one of the reasons I think that happens, in human systems at least, is that we do localized optimization on humans. We have separated all of the parts of people's lives into different buckets, and then we optimize them, right? So the classic example of this is work hard, play hard, right? Why not just live better, right? This is really highly problematic to me, and so the result of it is that we get, again, systems that are really affect our sustainability as humans. We have a lot of environmental damage from a lot of the systems that have more agency, again, than most of the human beings in it. So one of the problems I think we need to solve when we're system thinking is how can we make systems that don't get out of control, that the humans are more in control than the system itself. The problem of expertise. So this is a classic systems problem. Managers don't know what the people who work for them do anymore. And yet they're expected to make decisions about what they do. That is a huge problem. I've written a lot about this recently. I think it's something that we should examine a lot. Another one is this. When we design systems, we need to design systems that assume that managers are as human as the people that they're managing, right? We need to stop this idea that leaders are heroes, right? And I also like, the Lord Acton quote is quite nice, but again, nobody would admit to it, right? Nobody would want that applied to them. I like the idea that what we need to accept is that we need to design systems that have the assumption built in that their leaders will occasionally make mistakes, and how would that impact system design? So intentional stance, here's another really bad problem with human systems. If you're playing a computer game, if you're playing like chess, how do you know which chess move to make next? One of the things you do is you assume that the computer is a human and it will make a human-like move. So you make assumptions about other people as well. And one of the things that you assume is that you're a rational human, because I'd be rational in your case. And so you assume that the other person is always acting rationally. The other thing is that you assume that they're making decisions when they're pretty frequently actually not making decisions, right? So the intentional stance has this inherent problem in it, especially in hierarchical organizations where you get an order and your assumption is that somebody must have thought about this, so I'll just do it. And that's problematic. So how do we get around those things? The boxpacking algorithm, how many widgets can we make in this time period? I think is highly problematic, and it's something that a lot of systems that we build encourages that type of thinking. A focus on inspecting output and adapting output. So I think Deming has said it pretty clearly. The goal of a good system is to build quality in, not to inspect quality in. And we have a system that we pretty regularly say the way to do it is to inspect and adapt, right? That seems problematic to me. And it's something that I think we need to be better about. So this is the kind of wrap up of the problems, because I've listed plenty for us to try to solve. Human beings exercise their responsibility within social settings. So Boliani created the concept of tacit knowledge, and one of the reasons he was trying to do it is to explain that people don't often know why they act the way they act inside of social systems. Schein says the same thing this way, which is this concept of culture, right? Which is that culture is a set of assumptions that define what we should pay attention to, right? It says culture is this thing that says if you watch right there, occasionally a rabbit will pop out and you can whack it on the head and we'll get something to eat. That's what to pay attention to. That's what culture is. So Schein has this idea that what we have at the top is the stuff that we can see pretty frequently. And a lot of what we do in Lean and kind of theory is to manage that stuff, artifacts and behavior. And the theory goes that if we can get people to understand the values we have, so we have manifestos and things like that, that will modify their actual behavior. Schein says the problem with that is that what is actually driving behavior is tacit assumptions. And so the way to think about this is and I've had several conversations recently about this, is that if you look at the leadership of a startup, effective leadership installs a culture from the very beginning. And by the time you're a successful company, what works, nobody talks about. It's just already is. The problem is that that works great until it doesn't work anymore, and then nobody knows why we make decisions the way we do anymore. I've already mentioned bringing work to durable teams, so I will skip that. So here's some potential principles to think about. The first assumption that we made at TLC is this one, which is that humans will learn if they're given the resources and psychological safety that they need. In other words, people want to do good work. It has to be the basis of systems design, human systems design. The other way to assume it is that people are lazy and they need to be motivated. The problem with that is that you design the system for the lowest common denominator and you basically cut off the high performers, right? So design the system for the highest performing people with the assumption that everybody else will do it, and then occasionally you might need to do some weeding. The second piece is Deming, which he says joy comes from work, again, this idea that joy comes from work. But one of the things that he says is that managers don't need to motivate people. They're motivated by their work. And the real problem with management is mainly that we are meddling when we try to motivate people, right? And all we need to do is kind of get out of the way and let them see the value of the work themselves, and they will perform better. So I have a model for this. I wish this clicker would go faster. That was called Agency and Communion. And it comes from a guy named Bakan. Hello. And he wrote a book called The Duality of Human Existence. And he basically says this. We have a concept called agency, and agency is this idea that we have individual goals that we want to fulfill, and agency is also this idea that we want to have an impact on the environment around us. We want to see the result. Systems where people can't see the result, so they act and they can't see a result, or they can't modify the system themselves, results in learned helplessness. You just stop acting unless you're told to. The other side of it is communion, and communion is the desire to be part of a community and to contribute to the community, to a greater good. So I put them on this graph, agency, communion, and here's the bad versions, which is you get supermen, so people with high levels of agency, with low levels of communion. These people act without consideration for others. The other one is you get sheep. So these people will do whatever they're told. They have a desire to do what the community wants, but a low desire to do what they want. Over here, low agency and low communion I call burger flippers. So these are people who are, they'll do whatever they're told. It's fine, whatever. And the people that we want are these people up here in the corner. And they're happy because they're interested in questions and outcomes and thinking about things. And they're happy most if they can answer this very specific question. What option can I choose to help the teams that I'm with, right? So this is the decision that I think that we've been trying to focus on our employees most on at TLC, right? Is every time you make a decision, can you ask this question, right? And it's set, and the top is important. So when you have uncertainty, when you're not sure what to do, you're trying to do the following. What skills do I have? What knowledge do I have? What options do I have? Which one does what I am capable of doing, how does that fit with the option space that I'm working in? So the result of that, we call this concept of popping the Y stack. We think that effectively, if people can answer that question, they can tell us this. Hey, Joe, what are you doing? Well, I'm making a login page. Okay, well, can you explain what that has to do with what we're doing? And they're able to pop it up these series of steps that go out to months or quarters or years and align themselves or be able to describe how it is that what they're doing has something to do with the outcome that the company is working for. Why is this stuff important? We think that distributed decision-making enables faster cycle times, and faster cycle times enables more small bets. Individuals with agency and communion are more engaged in their work, and people who are engaged in their work notice and react to changes in context, which enables continuous adaptation. Temporal and social distance between relevant information and those making the decisions impacts the quality, efficiency, and timeliness of those decisions. So the further away the source of information to the decision maker, the less effective, the longer it takes. So we want to really push the decision making down in the organization as much as possible. Diverse perspectives allow organizations to detect weak signals and generate optionality, enabling innovation, right? So we want to get diversity into the organization so that when we have a problem, we get a large option set. So one of the ways that we think at TLC is we think if we go to somebody and we say we want to be innovative about this problem, if we can't generate 5 to 10 different ways of solving that problem, then we're over-constrained. We need to bring more people in. We need to bring more viewpoints in. So we want to generate large amounts of options early, and we can't do that if we don't allow diverse thinking and diverse decision-making. So more options equals more value, more time equals more information, and more information and options equals better decisions. So based on that, uh, sorry, the system that we're trying to design is a system to support deferred, distributed, and diverse decision making, right? That's the system that we want to go for. And the way that we want to do that is we want people to focus on noticing decision points at TLC. We want them to notice when decisions are being made. And to wrap this back into systems thinking, decisions, why they're important is because what we're supposed to manage if we're system thinkers is the interactions. And decisions are the results of interactions. That's why we want to manage them. Outcomes of this kind of idea of especially deferred and especially diverse is a built assumption that we have at TLC, which is rules are waste. So that doesn't mean we can eliminate all rules. Sometimes you have to have waste in systems. But the assumption should be that rules are waste, right? So Drucker says, so much of what we call management consists of making it difficult for people to work. So one of the reasons we think that that's true is because we think that most teams are overly constrained. We have given them rules and we've never told them how to know when to stop using a rule. They just continue to use them because nobody told them to stop. So one of the things that we want to instill inside the organization is this idea, if you're given a rule, you should figure out whether or not it's still working for you and kill it if it's not. The result of that is often we get under-constrained teams, in which case we have to go in and manage them. But this is a good thing, right? It's better to have under-constrained teams that get a little chaotic so you can see it and go manage them than it is to have over-constrained teams that suppress bad things. That's part of what happens with over-constrained teams. So here are my two experiments. My first experiment is what we call decision economies. So with any decision, with any economy, the first thing you want to do is kind of know how rare the thing that you're trying to manage is. So you want to kind of enumerate how many of them you can have. So one of the things that we do is we count how many decisions you make by pulling cards across the line. But the other one is to have, we started this way. Keep track at the executive level, so me and my other executive that works with me, let's keep track of every decision we make for a day. Let's do that for 3 weeks. We figured out that we were capable of about 10 good decisions a day. And if you can only make 10 good decisions a day as an executive, all of a sudden you have a completely different perspective on how many questions people should ask you, right? So now you have, it's not that you want to suppress or just give away decisions, but you want to make sure that the right types of questions get to you so you are making decisions on things that matter and not which web server should we use. So I have a little sticky wall in my office, and the sticky wall has these two columns, interesting and why. And when someone comes in and asks me a question, I write it down and put it on interesting or why. If I put it on interesting, that's cool. It means that I found something I didn't expect to come to me, and I think that's fun. And I talk to people about that. If I put the sticky on why, then I do 5 whys on why did you bring me this decision? Why did this get to me? How is it that I could have helped you make this decision somewhere else that didn't involve me? Right? And so we're doing this at different levels in the organization now where we're trying to get people to say, if people bring you decisions that it is not a good idea for you to be making, so we go back to those principles. You're far away from the source of information. You don't have the skill. You aren't in the context. If people bring you those types of questions, how can we actually push those decisions down, and what systemic things are happening that are causing that? And pretty frequently it's fear or the lack of ability, the lack of structure on how to make that decision. I didn't know how to make the decision. I didn't know what qualities I should look for. And I also maybe didn't know how to align it with the strategy that we had. So that results in a 5 why analysis. So we consider that basically a failure. If the decision makes it upstream far enough that the executive goes, I shouldn't be seeing that, We assume that it's a failure, and then we try to trace back the decision making. One of the things that we're trying to think about is this. How do we know how many weak signals we acted on? So one of the things about pushing the decision making further down is that we hope that we get more weak signal activity, right? So people will notice lower in the organization, they won't have to go through the layers of management it takes to get a decision made, and therefore the weak signal will be more easily acted on. Again, to get back to this kind of concept of why we think it's important to do this, often when we're looking only at outcomes of systems, what happened, it becomes very difficult to know why that thing happened. And we're thinking if we move the decision, we move the attention of the organization back up to the decision-making level, then, and making people pay attention to that, maybe we'll get better results. My second experiment is beyond deadlines. So one of the things about deadlines is that they're pretty frequently decisions that are made far ahead of the actual result, right? That's kind of what a deadline is. So it's the if we are making decisions about deadlines, we're often putting this very weird thing into our environment, which is a very concrete, measurable point in time. Everybody knows what it is, right? And one of the things we want to do if we're talking about kind of lean and customer value and customer defining value and what is value. So we had a whole conversation over here about what value is. Value is very subtle. It's very hard to define, right? And so here's what I think happens, what our theory was. You give someone a deadline, which is easy to define, and then you ask them to notice these subtle things. And when they try to decide between those two things, should I do the slightly higher quality thing or should I get it done on deadline? They make the deadline decision more frequently, right? And that's problematic on a lot of different levels. I think it makes people focus on the wrong things. But more specifically, I think it makes us focus on a very bad behavior, which is if you have deadlines, you need estimates, right? So the problem with that is, Kahneman's just not very impressed by it. A lot of studies that we've done about expert estimations, right? So the ability for an expert to estimate how long it takes to do something show that even if you ask them and explain to them concepts of confidence levels, so you say, give me an estimate. Okay, now give me the one you're absolutely sure. So you get the spread. They still almost always underestimate the actual time, the actual outcome, right? So this is problematic, and I have lots of problems with it. I don't think it's impossible, and I don't think that all deadlines are bad, right? There are real deadlines. If you're making a TV commercial for the Super Bowl, you don't get it done by the Super Bowl, you've just wasted a lot of time. But what we did was that, So it also encourages this boxpacking algorithm, which gets to this idea if you have a deadline and there's a lot of pain involved in defining the deadline, one of the things you do is try to get as many things into the deadline as possible. This is also problematic because as time passes, we get more information about how things are, but at the same time, as time passes, we get fewer and fewer options, right? So if we have a deadline that we're meeting against and we are moving towards the deadline, by default, we're losing options, right? And Jim Benson has this way of putting it, which is, this is the results of deadlines, and we increase information, we've got a deadline. The start, we actually make some pretty good decisions. By then, we're making really crappy decisions because by default, more options means we get more value, better decision making. As we move towards the deadline, we get less options, so we have crappy decision making, right? It's not that we get worse at decision making, it's that we have less options, so we can't make choices anymore. So we're forced into bad decisions, right? So again, not all deadlines are bad, but deadlines are bad, right? By default, they cause huge amounts of waste in organizations. So what we did in my organization is we said, Under no circumstance, except if you're an executive, may you ever set any deadline in the organization. You may not do it, right? And if a deadline comes up, if you find a deadline, you need to define why it. So you need, why is this a deadline? And then you need to know why that thing's a deadline and that thing is a deadline. What we found when we did this is often they were circular. Deadlines came back to, oh, that guy told me I had to do it. And you go to that guy and he says, that guy told me that. And then he points you back to that guy, right? They were all fake. There were no deadlines. They were all synchronization points that had nothing to do with the external environment at all, right? And the result of it, again, is this huge amount of waste. So what we wanted to do was make sure that when we set deadlines, people were very cognizant that they were making a decision and that the people, in order to avoid the boxpacking algorithm, the default mechanism we wanted to have for people to do is say, oh, I have a deadline. What's the absolute minimum amount of work I could do for that deadline? I want to take everything out of the box. Only do the stuff that achieves the deadline and make sure nothing else gets in. Because you're saying it's a deadline. If we miss it, it's going to be bad, right? So the best way to do that is to focus on only what we need to get done for that deadline. It's the opposite behavior of a lot of organizations. So a lot of organizations have a release gate where they have to go through some sort of regression cycle, and the regression cycle is painful, and everybody in the organization knows the way to avoid getting in the regression cycle is to get your stuff into this one. So you just get it in early, right? And people pack as much stuff as they can in. So this is the virtuous cycle that we saw when we did this, which was less deadlines meant more slack. More slack was applied to increasing the quality of the code, including doing refactoring, unit testing, all those types of things. That higher code reduced the cycle time, which meant that we could have less deadlines. Because if you can actually compress your cycle time below any reasonable deadline that you'd expect to see, so if your customers would never ask you for a deadline of more than a month, if you can get your cycle time below a month, you can fill any request, right? So pulling the cycle time in meant that we had less deadlines. And this was so effective that we actually went around to our customers and told them that we would not accept deadlines from them. And we said it in person. We went up to them and we said, listen, we won't take deadlines from you. We think it is bad for your business to set deadlines for us. What we will do is listen very actively to what you want and make sure it gets in our active release cycles. So that made less deadlines as well. The thing that we did notice, however, is this, because I talked a lot about kind of removing constraints and things like that. Removing constraints from organizations is a cultural problem. It is not a value problem. You can't just tell people to stop giving you deadlines. The pretty standard interaction that I got when I first told people to stop doing deadlines was I'd go up to them and I'd say, I need you to build me a web page. And the developer would say back to me, okay, I'll have it by Friday. And I said to him, dude, you can't say that, because you know what's going to happen is I've got it in my head to use deadlines, and I'm going to go over to this guy and say, he's going to have it done by Friday. Can you start that thing on Tuesday? And I'm going to start to build these causal chains that are the real problem with deadlines. Is that the deadlines, that 5Ying of deadlines, they build on each other and they infect your organization with this negative behavior. So I have a couple suggestions towards better systems. The first one is really simple. This is from our Credo, from the LSS, and I think this is great. So we need to produce better economic and sociological outcomes. I think when I think about this, that what we're doing, if we embrace this particular concept, is that we are going to produce equitable outcomes. And I think we should all think that that's good. But I think that is missing something. I think that one of the things that, again, we're seeing is that we're building systems that are out of control. They are consuming more than the value they produce, and largely it's because they're ignoring constraints. And I think the primary constraint that a lot of systems are ignoring are the environment that they're in. And the way that we ignore environmental constraints is we declare externalities, right? We say, oh, that's somebody else's problem. The waste that we're producing is not part of the company. We externalize it, right? So every system requires a certain environmental conditions in order to function, and that's what we call an open system. And so what I would like to propose that we consider as a group is to change the Credo to read this, which is effective systems must produce better economic, sociological, and environmental outcomes. Because I believe that if we don't have our systems constrained by the environments that they're in, including the planet, water, all those other good things, we're encouraging people to build systems that can get out of control, and I think that's a bad idea. My other suggestion, which is wonderful that we had a couple talks about this already, and I'm excited to see it, is that what we really need to do in order to keep systems under human control is to teach individuals to create and maintain human systems. This is something that if we can teach more people how to do, I think will produce much better outcomes for organizations. One of the things about having groups who want to respond to emergent demands by creating teams around problems is that they need to know how to create teams. And we actually don't have a very good system for that in most organizations. And I think that that's largely because of this. Right now, I think that most organizations have some concentration around allowing people to have process agency. I'll tell you what we need to get done. You can figure out how to do it. And that's great. I think it's a great place to start. But what we don't have is a lot of organizations that are capable of allowing goal agency and purpose agency, right? So we don't have a lot of organizations where you can say, you can figure out what we need to do in order to achieve our purpose. We don't have a lot of organizations that say, you can define the purpose, or you can have an impact on the purpose. And agency, again, is not autonomy. It's not the ability to do whatever you want. It's the ability to impact the environment around you. So I love, the create your own reality at Rally really reminds me of this concept. And I have a little model that I use to think about this, which is that the clicker will work someday again. We're focusing largely around technical skills for most people, right? So we're pretty good at teaching people how to build technical systems, software systems. We're not bad at it. We've got a lot of good techniques and ideas around how to do that. What we don't have is a lot of good ways of teaching people how to build personal systems. So systems that balance what they desire and what they need out of life. And we also don't have a lot of good ways of telling people how to build social systems. And so just as kind of a metaphor of a metaphor, what would it be like if people could do this? If I go to most people, most software engineers, and I say, what is technical debt? They say technical debt is basically when the system is making more decisions about the architecture than we are, right? That's what technical debt is. That we've lost control of the software, and that we need to pay down that debt in order to re-control the system. In order to be able to make the decisions that we want to make, we need to limit our technical debt. So we have a metaphor that allows us to describe a system being out of control. It just happens to be a software system. What if we had the metaphors and ideas around that to explain to people you're personally out of control, or the social system you're in is out of control? And how would they go about bringing down the debt of the social system that they're in order that the human could be making more decisions than the system? Does that make sense? So I would love to see that, and that would be something I'd love to see inside as an outcome from the LSS. So this is kind of my motto, which is, you want to understand something, try to fix it. And I'd like to thank you guys all for listening to me. Most of you stayed awake, so that's good. Thank you.